So, Beto, usually on this podcast we talk about psychology, but every once in a while we dip into our nerddom and we talk about Star Wars stuff. And I feel like we can't move forward with our lives without talking and acknowledging the new Disney Plus TV show called The Mandalorian.
With Nicolas Cage.
So let's do it. Let's annoy all those listeners who hate Star Wars. And if you're one of those people, just skip this episode. Because that's all we're going to talk about now. It's just going to be nerding out about The Mandalorian. There's going to be no psychological content at all.
I hate nerds!
This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor.
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I run a small organic carbonite farm out west.
So what do you think it got on Rotten Tomatoes?
Like 96.
89.
From users or critics?
Critics.
Okay.
Pretty high. Oh yeah, what's it getting from users? Because that's
I think I was thinking users.
Mandalorian Rotten Tomatoes. Looking it up on the internet now. Users, wow, 94.
Yeah.
So that's surprising because, you know, sometimes with these things you get this sort of fanboy backlash, even though we're a particular version of fanboy. You and I are fanboys.
I'm fanboy.
But there's a type of fanboy that hates anything that Kathleen Kennedy is connected with.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. I do have a lot of complaints about this one, but not because of Kathleen Kennedy.
So we're going to spoil the first 2 episodes.
Yay!
And that's all we've seen so far because that's all that's out.
Right.
By the time this episode comes out, I'm guessing more episodes will have come out. But so there you go. All right. So what do you like? What out of 10 would you give this?
So far, I would give it a 6.
Oh.
6 is good. 6 is a good show. You know, a show that I would say you should watch it. It's fun.
I'd give it an 8, maybe even a 9.
Oh, no.
And I'll tell you why.
Okay.
Because it's not like amazing TV.
Right.
It's not like Game of Thrones or this sort of thing yet. It's the first couple episodes. But it has serious promise. There's almost nothing about this show where I'm like, uh-oh, I don't like where that's heading. That's a bad sign of things to come. Almost every show you watch, all the greats, Game of Thrones, Breaking Bad,
has an amazing opening episode. I agree.
Not always. They often have, they might have a good pilot, but it takes a while to get into the swing of things because you have to introduce too many things to people. And with this, it has to do that. You got to introduce the world, even though you know we kind of know the world, but you have to introduce like this version of the world. You have to introduce the characters. There's a lot of things. So there's a lot of promise, is what I say. You know, if you look at it a certain way, and we'll get into it, I'm guessing. Also, I love the Star Wars universe, and one of the things that bugs me about the way that the Star Wars universe has been, I don't know, given to us over the years is that you have the movies, which come out, you know, once a year, once every couple of years. In the past, you know, 6 years. Before that, it was, you know,
decade.
But if there was a TV show, it was something that was essentially made for teenagers.
Yeah, a cartoon.
The Clone Wars, Rebels. These are kind of made for teenagers, young adults. I still like these cartoons.
Yeah, and the guy making this one, it made Clone Wars, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And so what this show is it's like adult. It's trying to appeal to adults.
It's rated PG though.
But it's not. The cartoons are also kind of geared towards adults, but not as much. Anyway, the point is that. I just love these kinds of stories, and I want more of them.
And there hasn't been a good live action TV Star Wars thing.
Has there been, aside from the Christmas special? Has there been?
Yeah, that's the only one.
Yeah. So to me, even though the product can't really compare to a movie like, you know, Episode 7 or Rogue One or something, or obviously Episode 4, 5, and 6, it's right down the middle of like what I want out of Star Wars, and I'm going to thoroughly enjoy this. And there's just a lot of good things about the show. Why are you only giving it a 6?
Oh, so I found it entertaining in the way actually that like to me, it feels like a cartoony show, you know, like a good old spaghetti Western sort of comic booky style. It doesn't particularly feel very Star Wars to me. I mean, obviously it is, all the characters are, but there's something about it, and it's probably the score and the look of it that doesn't bring me in like the movies can, you know? Even the bad ones, honestly, they still bring me in to that Star Wars feel, I guess.
Well, so is it the music? Because the music is a complete departure.
Yeah, the music is a lot of it, but I think the look of it is also important. Like, this one looks, you know, like a TV show. It doesn't have like sort of that larger than life look.
Like the Star Destroyers.
Yeah, and the
battling.
zooming in and I don't know, and
the epic nature of it.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, I think this is a confirmation of something I've thought about, a difference between you and me in terms of our nerddom. Is like when Ant-Man came out, I loved it. Like, of the Marvel movies, when Ant-Man came out, I was just like, oh my God, what a refreshing movie.
Right.
Like, it's small. It's just about a dude and his boss at work and this technology that doesn't have much to do with anything aside from this business that they're in. It's a very small story. We're not talking about galaxy-wide consequences.
Right.
And I found it to be, you know, delightful, funny, interesting, compelling, movie. Looking back at the movie, I'm like, maybe not. But when I saw it,
was fun. It was a fun movie.
And I gave it a pretty high score. I was like, at the time, I was like top 3 Marvel movies.
And it surprised everyone, by the way. Like, who was going to watch an Ant-Man movie?
Right. But you were like, not so much on the Ant-Man.
No, I liked it.
Yeah.
I just wasn't like blown away, but I liked it.
Well, you might have given it a 6. I might have given Ant-Man an 8. Similar kind of thing.
Yeah.
There have been other things that we've talked about over the years that have had a similar difference, where I really appreciate when they put a microscope on certain things and they slow it down and they reduce the story elements to a few people or even one person and smaller stakes.
Yeah.
To me, it feels more gritty. It feels more believable. It feels more relatable. Iron Man 1, for example, pretty small stakes. You just have this guy who is the owner of a tech business, and he gets abducted, and then he escapes. Yeah. There's a second plot after that, but that's the major plot of the beginning of the movie.
Which is why I like, for example, I like Daredevil a lot because of that. I mean, or I should say, I didn't dislike it, even though it was so small. I actually liked it quite a bit.
Were you expecting The Mandalorian to wow you like an episode 8 or something?
No, that'd be unfair, for sure. And no, by the way, that's not why I'm giving it a 6. So that's not even fair. Like, I started by saying, well, look, I had fun with it. It felt like a good Western comic booky style, not as epic as the movies. But that's not why I'm giving it a 6, right? Because that would be unfair. Like, I would give Rick and Morty a fucking 10, and that one is like totally not like a movie. Like, it's very small little half-an-hour episodes and stuff. What I'm saying is, that's the premise. I did enjoy it. I'm enjoying it. I definitely will watch all these kind of things. The reason for me is actually, one, I actually don't like the score. That's true. I don't care much for the score. But the other more meaty parts are...
What do you like about the score?
It sounds... I guess it doesn't help me enjoy the scenes more. It's more like I notice it. And that's a funny thing to say from Star Wars, because in Star Wars the score is very noticeable, but normally the score is very noticeable in such an epic way.
Okay, let me ask you.
Yeah.
And this isn't a sort of Paul question.
Sure.
This is a legit kind of curiosity question. Did you grow up watching spaghetti westerns?
Yes.
So, Fistful of Dollars, Good, Bad, and the Ugly.
Yeah, and a lot, like in Colombia they would show that a lot.
Did you like them?
Yeah.
Because this is right up that alley. I mean,
Totally.
It's a total ripoff, and
which is what I like about it.
And the soundtrack is very similar. As I was listening to the music, I was like, "Oh, interesting. They're purposely copying a mode that those composers did back then, which was some variation on like what had come before it, right?" You know, because before that, when you watch like westerns of the 50s, there's these, you know, there's lots of horns, you know, bam,
Yeah.
you know, real kind of Gone with the Windy kinds of orchestra
Which
pieces.
I never liked.
Right, and it always sounds really odd. You're just
Yeah.
like, Jesus, where'd that music come from? In the 60s and 70s, they started going towards a more subdued, minor key, odd, yeah, more ethereal, more environmental, atmospheric kinds of things.
Right.
And so, and sparse and spare. And so the music score of this show had those elements, which I found to be delightful because I would imagine that most people, one, don't even really take notice consciously of the music.
Yeah.
And two, if they did, they wouldn't be old enough to appreciate that kind of style, that callback the way I was.
That's fair. I mean, I definitely prefer that to the older version of Westerns. So I guess for me, maybe it's still tied to the Star Wars thing. It's not something that I felt helped me enjoy the scenes better, and I noticed it, and so it kind of like took me out of it a little bit.
Is it just the story that you didn't like? Like
the story seems fine. I mean, obviously there's still more
fine,
mystery than anything.
but not good.
Well, I don't know where we're going with it, right? Like it's like, okay.
Well, so this is another difference that I just want to say. Like you think about, like when you saw, you know, this episode, will most likely come out before episode 9 comes out.
Yeah.
And the previews for the trailers for episode 9 has a cackling Palpatine at the end. And you're already like projecting some horrible storyline in your mind. Of the 10
I don't want Palpatine at all in any shape, way,
in
or
the
form.
10 possibilities that the writers inserted Palpatine into,
all of them are all 11 are terrible.
All of them are terrible.
Yeah.
For me, when I see that, I'm like, oh, I'm not like tantalized by that because I'm not really interested in seeing Palpatine again.
Sure.
But there's a huge void question mark.
Right.
For me,
you're giving him the benefit of the doubt.
No, I'm not giving him anything. I just don't think about it. I'm like, well, that's interesting. I guess we'll see what happens there.
Yeah.
I'm just reserving judgment until I see what the fuck they're going to present because I just, you know, there's just no way to know because it could be terrible. They could not insert Palpatine and it could be terrible. So there's so many ways they could fuck up episode 9. And there's also a million ways they could make it right. And there's just no way to know. So, but that's something you do is I think you, in comparison to me, think much more about like, wait, where is this headed?
That's true.
Like with The Mandalorian, when Baby Yoda shows up, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And I'm not thinking about what's going to happen. And I read online Reddit forums and everyone's like has all these theories. And I'm just like, well, usually the theories are wrong.
Sure. Yeah.
And two, even if they are right, you don't know how they're going to execute it. Like you just
that's fair.
Who knows?
And so you are absolutely right because what happens to me is stuff like with, for example, the Baby Yoda reveal. It's like, okay, I see. So we're going for cuteness, which is very cute. Won't deny that. But where are we going with this? Because in my mind, I'm like, are we saying that basically all Yoda creatures are just like naturally strong with the Force? Okay, fine. Are we saying this is a clone of Yoda and therefore it's like it hints at midichlorian conversation, which I definitely don't want to have.
I know. Well, so on that tip, so I've watched the Clone Wars and Mandalorian and Clone Wars. And to some extent, Rebels too. There's a fair amount of lore that are in those two cartoons.
And by the way, I have not watched those, so that might be part of the thing that I'm missing. You know, there's
and so maybe that's another part of it too, because for you're a movie person.
For Star Wars, I've never read the books.
Right.
I've barely watched episodes 1 through 3, and that's not fair. I obviously did. Although it's been so long, but I've definitely not seen the cartoons. I did play games like the Knights of the Old Republic, but that's different.
Yeah, it goes way back.
Yeah, 1,000 years.
But you know, some lore around Sith and that kind of thing. But the one thing I was worried about was that the Mandalorian is marketed towards people like you who are movie people of the Star Wars universe. And as I'm watching it, I'm like, oh, there's a lot of references to the cartoons. It's pretty subtle. I mean, it's not like you have had to have watched the cartoons, and they kind of lay it out so it's not super, you know, arcane to figure out. You know, like the armor piece, the well, anyway, so I was wondering, like, oh, I wonder, and I'm also wondering, and I'm worried actually now that you bring it up, if they start, because there's a lot of details to the Force,
Right.
that not Fillion, but the guy who made, what's his name,
The Iron Man guy,
Dave Filoni.
Oh.
So Dave Filoni. So Jon Favreau is writer and creator of the show, who did Elf, which is one of my favorite movies of all time.
Yeah, Elf is
Iron Man,
fantastic.
Iron Man 2, Chef. He was in Chef, Jungle Book, Lion King, and produced many of the MCU movies. And of course, he's super famous originally for Swingers in 1996. But Dave Filoni, he's always wearing a cowboy hat. So if you've seen pictures, and he looks like a Star Wars nerd. And anyway, he's the one who, he's like the George Lucas of the Star Wars Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels.
Oh, okay. So he's sort of like the subject matter expert for those.
Yeah. Well, not only subject matter, but writer, producer, director, main art director, like advisor. Right. He's the one who has his fingers in everything.
So that's the one that I heard was from Clone Wars that is involved with this.
Dave Filoni.
Got it.
And so what I'm worried about is that they're gonna, because there's some goofy things in the cartoons that I think they pull off well enough in the cartoons, because it's a cartoon and you're just sort of like, well, you got to pump out 25 minutes of content every week.
It's like anime, right? Anime is like great, but it's also really weird.
Right. And it's an old style season where there's like dozens of episodes in a season. It's not just 10 episodes.
Right.
And so, there's an episode where Yoda goes to a planet that is the center of the Force, essentially, or the center of the universe. And there are these 4 spirits that represent different emotions, and they're different sort of sides of the Force, essentially. And Yoda goes into this cave, like the way that he sent Luke into the cave in episode. And by the way, I blame all this lore and weirdness on episode 5, Empire Strikes Back, when Yoda sends Luke into the cave and he sees this weird thing.
And he sees his own face. And
it's this weird kind of Force cave. And Yoda knows when you go in there, something weird's going to happen. And it's like, that adds a whole other weird element to the Force, because it's like, okay, so the Force is concentrated in certain areas.
Right, that's actually a good point, because they could have spun it like, they didn't give any hints, but they could have spun it like the tree is. In fact, this would have been such a kung fu movie kind of thing to do. That's just a tree stump, but Yoda from the outside is like making Luke see things to test them. That would have been much cleaner.
Or it's a dream, a Force dream that Force sensitive people have.
Sure.
Or just some kind of random Force hallucination.
But if it's really a place,
but it's a place on a planet. It's a physical place that Yoda knows. You go in there, you're going to see some shit, and it's going to be particular to you. And the Force works in these weird ways. And so that scene set up a whole bunch of story possibilities, because that's super fucking canon. Episode 5.
No, totally. I mean, we cannot discount that.
Right.
Now, I could have my hypothesis, which is, well, Yoda made him see it.
That's not what Yoda indicated.
Well, he doesn't go back to it in Return of the Jedi. By then, they didn't talk about it in the movie, but I know behind the scenes, they were like, hey, that was a funny test you pulled on me in that tree. Yeah, I know. It was just a tree.
99, I know.
A tree it was just.
So in the cartoon, they explore lots of different things. I mean, they have whole episodes dedicated to C-3PO and R2-D2. You know what I mean? Because they just run out of storylines.
They need an episode.
They have like full episodes with Mace Windu, for example. Okay. Which is really... So they explore these different characters.
Does Samuel Jackson voice Mace Windu? Probably not.
No.
Yeah.
And they have a whole episode dedicated to the calamari, which is kind of fun.
The what?
The calamari.
Okay, yeah.
And because they're like a major force. All those ships that were in episode 5 and 6 were calamari ships. Anyway.
Oh, interesting.
They had the best rebel fleet.
Okay.
They had the best fleet in opposition to the Empire during episodes 4 through 5.
So like Akbar's people?
Right.
Okay.
And Akbar, young Akbar, is in this, when Anakin was young, so was Akbar.
Right.
You know what I mean? Anyway, so they go into a lot of things, and one of the things they go into are these weird caves and like and hallucinations and like aspects of the Force. And what I'm worried about with the Mandalorian is that they're going to start going into that because Dave Filoni, wrote all those things.
I see.
And has that in his head as like, a possibility. And if he inserts that, I can't imagine that working out very well.
So that makes sense. I hadn't even considered any of that. For me, okay, so in episode, maybe it's 2 or 3, one of those, when the little Padawans are training and they have the stupid helmets on and with the little balls.
By the way, I saw the joke you and your brother were doing.
I posted it to my brother's Facebook page.
Well, I didn't get the joke though.
Well, here's what happened. I had been going back and forth with my friend Seth because he really loves The Mandalorian. He'd probably be like saying it's a 9 or something, right? And actually, maybe I was a 7 before I had these debates with him. But one of the things I complained about was the carbonite scene in the first episode, where the Mandalorian is unloading his bounties, and they're all in carbonite. And I just thought that was such a pandery fan service thing that doesn't make any sense, because I'm like, look, that was a move that Darth Vader pulled in Cloud City with this huge machinery, and it was super risky. And now they have it like 5 years later as a convenience thing in the ship, basement of his ship.
Yeah, but one could imagine that the practice was popularized after episode 5 somehow, but through the bounty hunter. Boba Fett was a well-known bounty hunter, and maybe Han was the very first bounty that did, because Darth Vader wanted to experiment, because that was how he framed it. They're like, we haven't used it with humans before, or something like that. That's what they said. And so it's conceivable.
But tech doesn't advance in the Star Wars universe. Like if you look
practices do, like conventions, like ship conventions and stuff. And
we don't see it much.
No, but you could imagine a popularized.
And they shrunk the technology to fit in little tubes in the basement of a ship.
They advanced.
Well, it bothered me. But it bothered me in the same way, of course, nowhere near as egregious, as the pandery stuff in the episodes 1 through 3. For example, the extreme example is the little kids training with their helmets that you can't see with the little balls, which was just a contrivance that Obi-Wan came up with in the moment to teach him a lesson in the Millennium Falcon. Yeah. Why would that have been a standard practice for the Padawan?
You're not going to get any argument.
I know,
from
right?
Me. Plus, that scene is in episode 3 is executed so poorly.
I know.
Because George Lucas is such a terrible director in his old age. He was an awesome director in his young age. A terrible director. Because you could have written that scene is the way it's written on the page is probably fine.
Yeah.
Young, Anakin and Obi-Wan enter a room. Yoda is training Padawans. They all have little lightsabers, and they're learning how to use the Force instead of their eyes.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a lot of ways you could do that. One, the children wouldn't all just be standing there in this static,
waving their little death sabers right next to each other, standing like a foot apart,
and they're not even doing much, because Lucas probably shot the scene and said, well, we'll fix it we'll fix it in post, because the kids are just kind of like waving these little sticks around.
I know.
Also, you could put them in blindfolds.
Yeah, just blindfold them and have like 3 kids spaced apart, doing very basic things. Maybe not even with a real lightsaber or something.
Yeah, like just a stick.
Yeah,
and Yoda's using the Force,
throwing balls at them, or something.
Throwing pebbles. You know? And it's not working, because that's the other thing.
You gotta fail
in the scene. The Padawans are haphazardly waving these, in this very anemic manner, as if they'd been doing it probably all day, because they probably had been as actors. And just randomly, getting these things. Yeah, it's a terrible. So I'm with you on that.
If that's like an 11 on the bad scale, the carbonite is maybe like a 4 on that scale. But for me,
it's a cool, man. Carbonite's cool.
I don't like it. I don't like that kind of like wink wink. Also, like other things about it.
I don't know if that's wink wink. Honestly, I think the writer was like, how do we want to see these bounties being transported alive?
Why can't they what did they do before? What did they do for the 1,000 years before, since Knights of the Old Republic till now?
Put them in a cage or
yeah,
something.
exactly.
But
this wasn't a problem that.
But
needed
this is
solving.
cool. It's just cool looking.
Well, I didn't like it, but that was why I posted that picture to my brother's page because my brother said, it doesn't bother me. I don't find it off. And so I was trying to be all Berto on him and be like, oh yeah, well then you must love this scene.
Oh, I get it.
The other things that I thought were, not great. The opening scene in the first episode is too cliche for me. It's like the guy comes in, we know right as soon as the scene starts, okay, this is going to be the thing. The bully in the bar is going to say something. Then he's going to get in a fight and he's going to kick everyone's ass. Of course. And then not only is it literally how it plays out, but it sort of doesn't make sense. It's like, you spilled my drink because the door opened and stuff. And then the fight's not even that interesting. So I was underwhelmed by that opening scene. I thought they could have done much better creatively there.
So this is interesting because when you and I saw episode 7,
yeah,
the whole thing was a callback to episode 4.
Yeah, but in a good way.
Okay.
Yeah.
And one could argue, so you and I walked out of episode 7.
Yeah.
The Force Awakens, and were elated. We were beside ourselves.
Yeah,
we were like, oh my God, that was awesome and satisfying. One of the best movie experiences we've been in our lives. Watching it on subsequent watches, it's not like it's, the best movie of all time. But as an experience, low expectations given episode 1 through 3.
Right.
Pretty solidly nailing a good movie. J.J. Abrams, shepherded the next phase of Star Wars really well.
And some good creative choices.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But a shit ton of callbacks.
Absolutely.
And when you look at it through a critical eye, the way that some people looked at The Force Awakens, you're just like, yeah, I get it.
But look, I love Tarantino, and he's nothing if not callbacks.
Right. So
it's not the callbacks.
Okay. So it's not the callbacks,
No.
and that's the point.
It's the delivery.
Well, so when I was watching Mandalorian, what I'm wondering is if you were primed wrong or you were in the wrong kind of mindset when you were watching it, because not wrong, but in a way that made it so that the callback seemed annoying to you, because there's nothing irrational about what you're saying. It was a callback. It was obvious. But to me, as I was watching it, I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Well, the difference is, okay, I don't know if you ever saw They Call Me Trinity movies. They were spaghetti westerns. There was this blonde dude who was a badass pistolier and his buddy who was this buff big dude. Some of my favorite movies. Super shitty quality, just film wise, right? But so entertaining. As an example, very commonly these scenes would play out. He'd walk into a cantina and a tavern, whatever, and sure enough, the gunfight.
I get it,
but they were so creative.
Okay, but give me your mindset and the context of you watching the show, because I can imagine, and maybe I'm wrong, and maybe there's some other thing you could say. It's just a theory, just a thought.
Sure.
Is that you went into this TV show going I don't know about this. 1, 2. You could have been in a distractible environment.
No, I was fully immersed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, fully immersed in my big screen.
Were you skeptical going in?
No, I was looking forward to it because I heard great things. I will say, I thought originally this was the Boba Fett thing, but I quickly learned as it started. I'm like, oh, I guess this isn't about Boba Fett. Okay.
So you're in a good environment. You're not in a bad mood as you're watching and you're watching that first scene.
Yeah.
And you're like, nah.
Well, I'm just like, okay, but it wasn't like, oh my God, this is great. It was just
neither me.
Okay.
Neither me. I just let it.
Yeah, that's why it's a 6 that scene is a 6.
I just let it kind of. I wouldn't say that scene is awesome, but
right.
It didn't bother me at all.
Well, it didn't bother me. I just was not that impressed. I mean, the opening scene of the great shows usually impresses me, and in this case, I was like, okay, but there was no witty banter. There was no. I didn't learn anything about the character other than, okay, he can fight these low level nobodies. Okay, so and then the next part is they introduce the bounty, the dude, And he felt out of place in the Star Wars universe. He reminded me of something that Lucas would have put in episode 1 or 2. Because,
right.
you know.
So that I can see. I can see, because that's actually Horatio. I can't remember his name. What is his name? I want to say his full name. God damn it. Horatio Sands.
What's he from? That sounds familiar.
SNL.
Oh, okay.
So he was kind of the huskier guy from the Jimmy Fallon days.
Yeah.
And he was obviously cast for his contemporary comedic delivery.
Right.
The way he plays the everyman who is groveling and trying to make conversation.
Yeah.
You know. And the talkative one versus, they obviously were like, well, we have to create space, and we're going to have the Mandalorian who doesn't say much, and we have this bounty who is saying a lot of things and trying to flesh out that character a little bit. And so I could totally, and as I was watching that scene, I was like, oh, if you're not bought into this show, I could see how that character could annoy you, because we've never really seen a character like that. Like we don't have, he's essentially like a character from like The Office or Parks and Rec.
Right. And again,
but I like that. I thought it was a good addition because, again, I wonder if it just has to do with I was primed by the cartoons, because the cartoons has stuff like that abound.
Sure, yeah, I'm sure.
Like
that could absolutely be. And like I said, none of these things, at no point, neither in episode 1 or 2, was I like, okay, I'm not liking the Mandalorian. At no point was I like, okay, I'm really not liking the show, or I might give up on this, or anything. It was always just like, and by the way, there were some scenes that I really liked, right? Like that if I was just grading those scenes, I'd give it an 8. Okay, so like the whole, for example, in the first episode, I did like when the gunfight was amazing with the IG-11, and in fact the IG-11 part of it was really fun to watch and creative, and I thought, well, yeah, that's great. What would you do against this like perfect robot with spinning arms? And I had that toy as a kid. I mean, not that one, but the other
IG-88,
and so I was very excited because you never saw what that robot could have done.
Right.
So that's the kind of callback that I'm like, sure, it's fan servicey, but you know what? There's repeats of these robots all over the place. I'll take it. And it was fun. It was good. And then the Mandalorian was doing his shooting. There was some tension in the air. It's like, more bad guys showed up. Then they show up with a big-ass gun. And there's some things you could poke holes at, like, why did that gun not take down that wall? But it was still fun. It was fun. So that's a good scene.
Okay, what else?
In the second episode, I did enjoy the chase, like him chasing the Jawas.
The
Sandcrawler and all that stuff. I thought it was, given how it's been explained to me that these Mandalorians are supposed to be like the ninja badasses, I thought it was silly that they just like neutralized them so easily. But up to that point, I was really enjoying that whole sequence. That was really cool.
Yeah, I thought that scene was so good.
Yeah.
Like the direction, the pace, the conclusion, the comedic way that he just fell.
Yeah.
Now, completely. So there's only a couple things that I was like I did. Now, again, I'm not saying it's the best thing that ever is on TV. I'm just saying that in the same way that the Clone Wars is a thoroughly enjoyable cartoon, I can't. If we're going to compare any episode of the Clone Wars cartoon to really even any of the movies, even episodes 1 through 3. You just can't really compare the two. We're talking about a TV show that has to pump out an episode every week for a span of time. The budget is smaller. The story is purposely smaller.
The challenge for it, though, is that it's Disney's marquee show for their new Disney Plus thing, which I signed up for and paid for, right? Yeah. Number one. And number two, it is being compared, maybe unfairly, against all these amazing hyper-budget shows that have come out in the last few years. And so that makes it a little different.
Like Game of Thrones.
But
if I challenge people to go back to the very first episode of Game of Thrones and just watch it from the mindset of like, you have no idea where this is headed.
But I did. And it blew my mind. But that might be just... Or the first episode of Lost. That episode blew everyone's minds. The first episode of Breaking Bad.
The first episode of Game of Thrones blew your mind?
Yeah. Because I'd never read the books. I had no idea what it was about. And I was so intrigued by that world immediately. And when I saw the White Walker at the end of the episode, I was like, oh, what the? Yeah, I loved it.
Oh, interesting. Well, you know, I'm not going to say the pilot is... I don't know. I really like the pilot. I think the tone... I think I just really appreciate it when story... Here's what I think kind of hooks me.
Yeah.
Is that the style of the writing and directing and acting and editing and, you know, the CG elements that they included, it gives me an idea of what's inside the Mandalorian's mind without much obviousness. With like, do you get a sense of what's in the Mandalorian's mind by watching the show?
A little bit. It seems like he was an orphan, and
no, like in those moments, like he's in the.
Oh yeah, sure, yes.
Like
they do a good job of kind of like letting you sense what he's feeling
in that moment.
One challenge that maybe this is also something that we should give them credit, but it creates a liability for them is because we don't know much about the character so far. It also makes it hard because, like in the pilot of Breaking Bad, we learned so much about Walter White. He's dying of cancer, and he's got all these conflicts with his family life versus what he wants to try to do, and it's really interesting.
But
right?
yeah, it's a different kind of empathy,
right?
The Clint Eastwood in Fistful of Dollars and Good, Bad, and the Ugly, these movies. We didn't know much about his history either, but we still cared about him in a certain way. And so they're going for that side. Anyway, let's take a break. We get back. I'm going to go through my notes here, and we'll get into the specifics. What do you say?
Sounds good.
So if Yoda was trying to use the Force, he was going to use the Force to make people become patrons of the podcast, what would he say?
I sense great power, potential I sense in you. Use your patron power. Donate you will. Donate you must. Become patron you will of Psychology in Seattle.
That's pretty good. All right, so let's go through my list here. The notes I took while I was watching the first two episodes. I liked that it was getting back to its roots as a Western in space.
Yeah. Which is what Star Wars was.
Yeah. Well, it was both a Western in space and a World War II movie in space.
Sure, yeah. The fights, the dog fights.
Right. The first half of episode 4 is totally a Western in space. The second half, or the last third, is totally a World War II movie in space.
Right.
And also that George Lucas grew up on serials. He grew up on serials of Westerns and serials of, before they had TV series, they had series that they would show in the theater.
Yeah.
Back when my mom was a kid, you would, as a parent, you wouldn't sit your kid down in front of the TV. On a Saturday, you'd drop the kids off at the movie theater, and the kids would just sit there and watch Flash Gordon and other Westerns and this kind of thing. And George Lucas originally wanted to recreate Flash Gordon. He wasn't given the rights, so he had to write his own kind of Flash Gordon-y world, and that's how he came up with Star Wars, if I remember right.
Interesting.
And that's where you get all those side swipes, and that's where you get the crawl, and that's where you get the style of telling the story. And so this is getting back to that, in that it's totally a style from that original, roots of Star Wars. Also, like I said, I like it that it's very similar to the Clone Wars cartoons because I really love those that cartoon series. Rebels, it was a little hard for me to get into, but Clone Wars, I think I've watched the whole series like twice. And there's a lot of cool bounty hunter storylines, like long-term story. There's a lot of bounty hunters, good and bad, in the Clone Wars cartoons that are really satisfying. I like that they don't spend much time explaining how this fits into the main story.
Right.
There's not a lot of like if you're a very casual Star Wars fan, like my wife Stacy, the pod wife, she she's a big Star Wars fan. I mean, it was her idea initially to name our dog Obi-Wan Kenobi. And so a little story on that, actually. So he came to us, he's a rescue from, and I hate it when people use the word rescue in this pretentious way, but he literally is, because he was from a cemetery in Louisiana.
What?
And there's a lot of stray dogs, or a lot of excess dogs in Louisiana these days, and a lot of them are put down. And so there's these organizations that work under the Pet Finder umbrella, and other organizations who will, find these stray dogs, house them in their own house, volunteer for that, give them to other foster homes who are volunteering. Then there's a caravan of different legs of journey where they drive all these dogs up to Seattle, because
Oh my gosh.
Seattle has a deficit of dogs, because up here we fix all of our animals as soon as we can. And so almost 99.9% of the dogs in Seattle
Come from somewhere else.
can't have children.
Yeah.
So they caravan all the dogs up here. All these people volunteer. There's foster homes in Seattle. We go to petfinder.com, which we've given thousands of dollars to as a part of this podcast. When you patrons give money, we give some of that money towards various charities that we support, including Pet Finder and also scholarships and homelessness organizations, this kind of thing. But anyway, so we get the dog, and the dog, I find it on Pet Finder. I find him on Pet Finder, and his name's Wiley.
Oh.
And I'm like, me and Stacy are both like, Wiley? I don't know. So we get him, and we immediately start thinking about different names. And the initial names that we came up with, I can't remember the very initial names, but eventually we started thinking Benjen, like Benjen Stark.
Oh, yeah.
And then we were thinking like Stranger Things, like Dustin or Steve. And we're like, we're kind of, you're just kind of throwing it around. You're not really close. And then at some point she says, well, how about Kylo or Kenobi? She just the second day she comes downstairs, wakes me up. She's like, oh, how about Kylo or Kenobi? What do you think? And I was like, oh, okay, now you're talking my language. And I'm going back and forth, and I'm like, you know what? I'm kind of thinking Kylo. Because Kenobi just sounds kind of not quite right. Kylo, that sounds good. And Stacy's like, yeah, I was leaning towards Kylo too. So at this point, we're kind of definitely in the Kylo camp.
Yeah. You're shipping with Kylo.
Yeah. And then I was like, well, I got to post a picture on Facebook, because about the dog, I know we have a lot of fans of the podcast who know we give to Pet Finder and love animals and have pets, and they want pictures of the cat and all that kind of stuff. And when our last dog died, Chloe, people are a part of that story. I did a whole episode about pet grief, like within, I don't know, days after Chloe had died. And so I posted a picture, and just as a kind of conversation starter, I threw out all these names that we had been mulling over. And, but without the intention of like, I'm not really asking, because we were pretty much decided it's Kylo. Well, overwhelmingly, people were like, Kenobi, he looks like a Kenobi. Everyone's Kenobi this, Kenobi that. A couple of people were saying, because I also said Jeff, because I thought that'd be a funny name for him, Jeff.
Yeah.
And there's like Jeff and then all this kind of stuff. Oh, no. So the first name I proposed was Bernie.
Okay.
We're this far into the episode. I hope I don't offend anyone. So 10 years ago, I got 2 cats from Pet Finder, and it was a boy and a girl, and it was during the first Obama election.
Right.
And there was a lot of hype around the 2008 election and blah, blah, blah. And the first day I got these, because their names, because they were from Lebanon, Beirut, Lebanon, so they had these Lebanese names, or Lebanese names that you would give cats.
Yeah.
Kiki and Kiwi.
Okay.
And I'll be damned if I'm going to call my cats Kiki and Kiwi.
Especially because they look nothing like a Kiwi or a Kiki.
Right? And so Obama was on my mind, and I just sort of looked at my cats and was just like, because it's a boy and a girl, and I was just like, oh, Michelle and Obama.
Yeah.
And even though that makes no sense, because you would say Michelle and Barack, but it just sort of popped out of my mouth. And within 5 seconds, I was like, well, that's, you can't call your cats Michelle and Obama. Like that's
Why not?
That's ridiculous. But because I had said it out loud,
It was too late.
it was too late.
Yeah.
I was like, oh shit, well now your names are Michelle and Obama,
Yeah.
even though I want to go back.
Yeah.
But I was like, well, it's
can't.
locked in. So we get this dog. I'm like, well, okay, what politician?
Yeah.
I was like, well, Bernie. He kind of looks like a Bernie.
Sure.
And that'd be a funny name while you're at the dog park. Come here, Bernie,
Yeah.
Because that's a big part of naming, the
Yeah.
vanity of like at the dog park, because you want to.
Oh, really? Is that a thing?
Yeah, you're comparing to other owners, like.
Oh my God.
Because if another owner has a dog that's named like Spot,
Oh my gosh.
or I don't know, Uncle Phil or something.
So I'll get like a big Rottweiler and call him Brutus. Come here, Brutus.
Yeah. Or like a podcast I listen to, TBTL, their cat is named Professor Bananas, like coming up with a clever name or a name that says something. It says something about the dog names say way more about the owners than it does about, it's sort of like when you pick a screen name.
Sure.
Like think about like you sign up
Sure.
on Twitch and you're like, okay, what's going to be my screen name?
Right.
You don't just you don't take the suggested name. You think about it.
Impossible.
This is a major decision here. You know what I mean? So anyway, so overwhelmingly on Facebook, the listeners are like Kenobi. And then I turn to Stacy and I'm like, I think we have to go with Kenobi now. So now the dog's name is Kenobi. So this is all to say that I'm a Star Wars fan. Is that why I got down this tangent?
Well, because you were trying to explain that even Stacy is she's more of a Star Wars
so this
fan.
is a-
or not more, but she's
This is
Star
a
Wars fan
tangent
as
of a
well.
tangent of a tangent. Thank
Yeah.
you for getting me back. Okay, so God, the little narcissist in me just loves this format of like, you put a microphone in front of my face and
There you go.
none of you listeners can tell me to shut up.
It's a fractal.
It just happens. It's the diarrhea of the mouth. Okay, so if Stacy watched this show, The Mandalorian, because she hasn't watched it yet.
She hasn't
I plan on rewatching it with her.
Okay.
I'm worried that she would be like, wait, where is that Boba Fett? Where are we? Okay, there's stormtroopers. So wait, what's happening?
Right.
Like now I would pretty quickly go, well, this is right after episode 6.
Yeah.
The second Death Star has blown up.
Yeah, the Empire's in decline.
The Empire,
Yeah.
Darth Vader is dead. The Palpatine Emperor is dead.
Palpatine is dead.
Well, in the same way that Darth Vader, Anakin is dead, and the same way that Yoda is dead, quote unquote. By the way, so a little side note on that. So do you know the lore, the canon around Palpatine and all that kind of stuff? And even Snoke and that kind of thing?
No.
So it might help to know a little bit. Do you mind if I tell you?
What do you mean lore? What are you saying that Snoke was in like other books or things?
Well, definitely there's been stuff written about him in comics and stuff, since.
Yeah, but it's a big mystery. Like everyone's
not
got all
necessarily
these
Snoke,
theories.
but Palpatine. So for episode 9, maybe it'll help to know this, is that, so as we know, Palpatine was investigating an old Sith or an old Jedi research area of how to live forever.
So we hear in movies that I don't care about, but yes.
But that part is canon, because that's why Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon and Yoda and Anakin all are space ghosts, Force ghosts, right?
Well, sure.
There's something about the Force.
But I always felt like that was because Obi-Wan specifically was, trying to show a lesson that like when you're in the light side, death only makes you stronger. And that was this power that you get if you were on the light side. That was an important difference.
And we also know, and this is a big part of the cartoons, is that the light side isn't necessarily good. It's the light side in that the universe needs balance. That's a big part of throughout the Star Wars series, and a big part of the cartoons that they explicitly go into. It's sort of like good Kirk, bad Kirk. It's like good Kirk is great, but without bad Kirk, there's no motivation. There's no, there's different sides of reality, yin and yang, that need to be in balance in order for things to go well. And so in the same way that you have Force Ghosts for the quote-unquote good Jedi, there's maybe this Force Ghost thing for Sith, for dark side Jedi or Force people, right? And so I can't remember all the details, but essentially the Order 66 executive order. Yeah. I'm mixing it up with World War II when they locked up my family. Executive Order 4022, I think, or 406. Anyway, Palpatine had this order that said,
right.
you know,
kill every Jedi.
Well, he also had this other order that if he dies, he did not want the Empire to live. He didn't, you know, he thought, you know, if I die, someone will take up the mantle and try to steer this ship. But I want the glory. So if I die, I want the Empire to implode. Mm-hmm. And so he had all these systems in place that if he died, it was going to implode. And another part of it was he had a plan that if he died, because he might have maybe even predicted he was going to die or something because he could see into the future, that if he died, he wanted the Empire to implode, and then he had a plan for coming back. And so the bigger overarching story might be that Snoke is a part of that Palpatine sort of coming back. And maybe in who knows, but maybe in a similar way that Voldemort died when he attacked Harry Potter as a kid and was a shadow of himself as he was rebuilding his power or something like that. Mm-hmm. That could be very cheesily done.
Yeah.
But it could also be done in a way that would be cool.
But the problem is that it's unearned for anyone who's not followed all the books and the things and the stuff. And Disney even had said, like, we're disavowing all the books. None of that is canon now.
Yeah.
And so, like, it will feel like they're trying to cram this whole backstory into the head of the pin.
Well, we'll see how they execute it.
Yeah.
The other thing that I think they're going to, and this could suck, believe me. I mean, you know, I'm not going to say episodes 1. I was looking forward to seeing episodes 1 through 3. I'm not going to say that they didn't suck in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But the other part of this is that I think what they're trying to set up is that beyond episode 9, we're going to be back kind of to the beginning where you have a rebellion and an empire, and that it'll be different this time because it'll be the First Order, and maybe they'll end up even calling themselves.
That's what they have now. They have a rebellion and an empire.
Well,
kind of.
Yeah, but it's. I
mean, not the First Order isn't in charge of everything,
and the rebellion is very small at this point.
Yeah.
It's like a couple hundred people or something, right? So I think what they're heading towards is some kind of version of that. And my guess is now that I'm talking it out, given how people write these days, it'll be some kind of bittersweet empire where it's like, well, it's an evil empire, but maybe it has some good elements. Like you might be able to empathize with the empire's vision on some level. By the way, I watched this whole analysis of how the Empire was actually good and the rebels were actually bad.
Yeah, I've seen that too.
Yeah. What do you remember from that?
Well, I mean, you know, it's like, well, on the one hand, the galaxy was functioning, you know, and you had trade and you had like peace, law and order being kept and all these kinds of things. And the rebels were literally terrorists, you know, and they would blow up shit and kill, you know, I don't know how many died in the Death Star, but all those were workers and facility maintenance people and families.
Yeah,
and
right, just innocent people who were at work,
right,
trying to earn a living.
Right, but then the flip side is that's like saying, well, yeah, but they were maintaining this moving weapon that would destroy planets. Yeah,
only if they stepped out of line.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway,
yeah, I don't like it.
Getting back to the Mandalorian, yeah. So I like that they didn't spend too much time explaining how it fits into the main story because too much exposition could have dragged it down, and you didn't really need it. Like if you don't know much about the Star Wars universe, you don't need to know because the story is so clear and understandable.
So with that, I totally agree. And in fact, if anything, I was kind of, or I'm kind of hoping for a little more. Show me new stuff, because so far a lot of what we've seen. Like, show me a few new things.
Well, Baby Yoda.
Well, show me a few new non-Ewok-y things.
Baby Yoda's not an Ewok.
It's serving the same function. And trust me,
and
he's very cute. And
not
I
only
actually
cute,
liked episode 2 better than episode 1 because I did like again, in a cartoony kind of like, but I liked the little interactions with Baby Yoda. And
yeah, I thought it was hilarious. Yeah. I mean, the every shot of Baby Yoda I thought was I liked it.
Yeah.
I don't know the word for it. But like, some main scenes, like when Baby Yoda gets out, is trying to heal Mandalorian.
Right.
I was literally laughing out loud watching that. I just thought it was, and I love the fact that they made it a puppet rather than CG. By the way, what does the I stand for in CGI?
Computer graphics,
right?
Computer.
I think we just
graphics.
I think we need to be saying
illustrations.
That could see, but I think we need to say CG. A lot of people just say CG these days. I think that's anyway. Because with a puppet, the original Yoda was a puppet. So whenever they make CG versions of Yoda, they can't help but to over animate him in a way that he wasn't in the original, because you couldn't, because he was a puppet.
Yeah.
But that's the Yoda we fell in love with. Yeah. We don't need to see him bouncing around and doing all these things, you know? And so with this, they made him a puppet, Baby Yoda, for the most part. And so it works. I don't know. I just thought that...
It's very cute.
Yeah. And, well, you keep saying cute, but to me, it's more than cute.
It's designed to be cute. It's like... that reveals scene.
It's designed to be a story. It's designed to be a story element, and it happens to be cute. That's the way I see it. I actually...
Sure.
I don't think it's like when they added the sixth Huxtable kid, to have it be a cute. Remember when they added, or in Family Ties when they added the younger brother because the younger girl grew up and they needed a new cute element. Like that's pandering to a cuteness thing, or Scrappy Doo for that matter.
Sure, but like Anakin in the first movie was supposed to be part of the story, and they try to make him cute.
Yeah.
Now they kind of failed in the grand scheme of things, but they were trying for that.
Yeah.
Here they're succeeding better because like it's cute and there's not a lot to complain about. It's like, okay, it's a cute Baby Yoda.
But when I after watching episodes 1 and 2, I went online and I was like, and everyone was freaking out about Baby Yoda and how cute he was and everything. And I was like, oh, because when I was watching it, I didn't think, oh my God, that's so cute. I was like, oh, that's interesting, Yoda. Oh, that's funny that he's trying to cure.
Yeah.
And you also know Baby Yoda's 50 years old.
Right.
So it's not like, anyway.
Which, by the way, someone pointed out, like, so wait a minute, because we were all under the impression that Yoda is 900 because his species, or maybe because of the Force, or both, he was able to live that long. But if he's still a baby at 50, maybe he's just like 40 years old when he's 900.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's a new element to the lore around Yoda's species.
But I liked it better in the other version, which is like, no, he's really old.
Yeah. I like that the Mandalorian feels like a real place. Like the scenes are shot, and the locations and the direction. I get a sense like that's a real planet with a real, deserty gully with a real bar.
Right.
That's a hard thing to pull off because it's like you're not in a real place. Does
not feel like a set.
Right. It doesn't feel like a set. And there's almost no CG. Obviously, the big monster bull thing is CG. Yeah. When you see the shot of the sand crawler going off into the sunset, that's got to be CG. But as he's crawling up the sand crawler, that's not CG.
Nope.
That's a real thing they built that a guy's climbing up. The Jawas are real Jawas throwing things at the Mandalorian. It's real things. It's not CG.
Right.
There's there's so much opportunity for people like Jon Favreau to be like, well, it'd be easier if we did it CG.
Right.
Because one, I could control it much more easily, and it's cheaper.
Yeah.
And it won't mean I have to, because to shoot that scene as the Mandalorian is climbing that, that sandcrawler, and all those things are flying out, that one, I don't know, 3-minute scene probably took like 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And that's very expensive. And so I very much appreciate that they didn't go in that direction.
Yep.
Because it feels like, a real show to me.
Yeah.
In fact, the one time when I was kind of like, oh, we're definitely not in a real world was with the giant bull.
Sure. That's a little harder to pull off.
Yeah. Like one way that I like directors to go in when they do stuff like that is one, actually have a practical giant head that they somehow edit to make it look like it's hitting the Mandalorian. And then when you need a wider shot, just for a half a second, you do CG.
Yeah.
Instead of like full on CG shots where the bull is running and that it, like in your head, all of us know that's not real.
Well, the other thing that it wasn't just that scene, and it's something I haven't been able to get a good answer. So I get like the Mandalorians are supposed to be like ninjas and really badass and stuff, but
They're
are
not
they
like
also like
they're not ninjas. They're more like knights.
okay? But I've heard conflicting stories on that then.
Well,
but
they're like knights and samurai kind of combined.
But are they supposed to be like really indestructible? Like
No,
because he gets his arm caught by the one beast and swung around, and like his shoulder's fine. Like that would dislocate like any human's shoulder for sure, right? Then he falls from the height of the sandcrawler on his back, and he's totally fine.
Right.
He gets rammed by this, who knows, like 2-ton creature.
Yeah.
And he's fine.
No. In fact, we actually don't technically know the race of... So the Mandalorian lore... Let's go into the Mandalorian lore. So when they call someone a Mandalorian in this stage of the history of the Star Wars universe, it's not actually a race. It's a designation.
Right, because he was adopted, and as far as we can tell, he's like humanoid.
Right. So now, a lot of the history of the Mandalorian stuff is from what's now called Legends and not the new canon, but there's a lot of stuff from the new canon because there's a lot of Mandalorian stuff in the cartoons. Anyway, so just to give a brief kind of summary of the Mandalorian culture is that, so do you know anything about the Mandalorian culture?
Not much.
Oh,
I mean,
the cat's joined.
from playing the game, the Knights of the Old Republic.
Like, what do you know?
Just that they have that cool looking armor like Boba Fett, and that they're
she's puking.
good fighters. But
The cat is puking.
I don't know much more than that.
Yeah, so they're a warrior culture. Think of like knights from the Middle Ages in Europe or something. Also think like samurai knights, not ninjas, but like honor bound to a house, to a lord, this kind of thing. Cat's really wanting to puke. Sometimes she does an in-mouth vomit, which I'm hoping for because then she won't puke on my carpet. Oh, she did. In-mouth vomit. I'll keep that. I'll keep all that in on the podcast. Also think like Klingons and Dothraki. It's kind of it's like all those kinds of things combined. Anyway, they're feared throughout the galaxy. The Mandalorian culture goes back like thousands of years. Armor is a big part to their culture, and also think of like knights.
Which, by the way, that was the other thing that struck me as odd in the cantina scene. And by the way, and again, maybe it's unfair, but you compare the cantina scene of episode 4 to that cantina scene, and it's so different. Like in the cantina in episode 4, there's so much variety of creatures, and it's like this whole atmosphere and stuff. Anyways, but I digress.
Dun, 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 dun,
yeah, and the
dun.
music. But the thing that was odd is that I thought they were supposed to be known. Like, why did all the bully and the other people not realize? Oh shit, it's a Mandalorian.
Well, because by this point in the history of this galaxy, the Mandalorians have fallen from grace in the similar way that the Jedi had.
I see.
Remember how like in episode 4 and 5, it's like Han Solo's like, oh, that old religion.
Yeah.
It's a similar thing with now, one could argue it's like Jedi were a part of the galaxy for thousands of years, and within like the span of 15 years, it's suddenly an old religion that no one remembers anymore. And you don't have video recorders in this world.
Well,
but
it's the same thing with in episode 7, right? When they're like, "Wait, you mean it was all real?" It's like, yeah, talk to anyone that's still alive. Like many people are still alive.
Yeah, in the world. So again, you have to acknowledge. You just have to remember this isn't sci-fi.
Right.
This is a Western in space, and in Westerns, they didn't have recorders.
Right.
There were tall tales. It was just word of mouth.
And that, by the way, that's totally fair. And in fact, why I hesitate to give them a gimme on the technology shrunk on the carbonite stuff is because, in fact, they have like this fixed kind of tech that is in a way low tech by today's standards. They have holographic communications, but they're shitty and they're, like all that kind of stuff.
Okay, I get it. It seems like a weird detail to focus on.
No, but I'm supporting your point that like they don't actually have as much tech as like we do in those video ways.
Yeah, in a lot of ways they have less tech than we. They don't have nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
They seemingly don't have cell phones or they don't have video recorders. Although they did show some video recorders. Anyway, so getting back to my list here. So the Mandalorian culture, they're feared. There's the armor, Beskar. Only on Mandalore is Beskar armor. The materials come from the lore. They deflect blasters, as we saw in the Mandalorian, and even lightsabers. And the making of
They deflect lightsabers?
They can. I mean, not like strictly, but like if it's a glancing blow, that kind of thing. And actually, the Mandalorians have a counter to lightsabers with these black blades kind of things. And so there are other lightsaber-like weapons in the Star Wars universe that we really haven't seen yet, and we might see. Like, you know how like those
we saw them in
episode
the movies
3 and right.
No, in the new ones, yeah.
Oh, right. So like these lightning-y kinds of. So there's other weapons that can compete with a lightsaber. And anyway, the armor is ritualized, seemingly. The making of it. In Mandalorian culture, in the old culture, you had these houses in the similar way that you had kingdoms and houses in Japan. They had an empire that spanned across the galaxy back in the old days. They were a ruling empire in the galaxy. And any race could become a Mandalorian in the same way that any ethnicity could become like a Roman back in the day. You could have a Roman citizen that was born in Germany, or a Roman citizen that was born in Jerusalem or something. You know what I mean? That's what Mandalorian began to mean. And originally it was like a particular race from a particular planet, but then eventually it became this thing that you could become. You could, if you fought well and you wanted to become a part of the culture, and someone trained you into that culture.
By the way, parentheses, what occurs to me is that, so imagine if they started a show and you'd never seen any movies of Lord of the Rings or anything, or Game of Thrones, but they started a show based on those kinds of universes, but they kind of do it like well in the middle, where it just assumes all these like backstories and things. But and that might be one of the things that people struggle with. I don't know if this show, but I think Star Wars has all this all this information. No one would ever know any of that unless you like read the books or maybe watched all the comics or the cartoons.
Episode 4 was that way. You come in right in the middle of Princess Leia being tracked down by the Starfleet. You're just like,
but
wait,
you get told everything you need to know.
And I think The Mandalorian, in my opinion, it's the same. Like, you don't need to know any of this stuff about the Mandalorian culture to.
But we haven't, as a viewer, I still don't know. I'm going to speak naively right now. I imagine I've only seen movies, right? I would say, wait, is that Boba Fett? A. Or B is like, well, I don't think it's Boba Fett. But it seems like the same kind of thing that Boba Fett is. But so he's a Mandalorian. Right. What are Mandalorians?
Yeah, I could see that being absolutely confusing to people. Of just like, so that's Boba Fett.
Yeah.
Like why would you think anything other than that?
Right.
That must be Boba Fett.
That's like his armor after he nearly died in the Sarlacc pit.
Oh, he must have come back.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I wonder if...
The other thing that I obviously immediately knew within the first scene that wasn't the case, but I actually thought the show was about Boba Fett because I had heard they were making something about Boba Fett. And then I heard the Mandalorians come in and I'm like, oh, okay. And then I'm like, that doesn't look like Boba Fett. And then the show starts. I'm like, oh, I don't think this is about Boba Fett.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So then this is, hundreds of years ago in a galaxy far, far away. Lots of wars. They even had a war with the Jedi. Like the Jedi and the Mandalorians actually had a war. They had a lot of civil wars because their empire was so big. Then by the time we get to episodes 1, 2, and 3 movies, they're basically friends of the Jedi in essence. But there are still warring factions. There's a lot of Clone Wars cartoons dedicated to the different factions of Mandalorians. Then Jango Fett, it's unknown, but the theory is that he stole some Mandalorian armor. So Jango Fett was not a Mandalorian.
Oh, he wasn't? Okay.
According to some...
Because Boba Fett isn't a Mandalorian.
Right,
Not racially, right?
Well, so anyone can racially be a Mandalorian. Remember that. You don't have to be a Mandalorian race to be a Mandalorian. But you have to be...
there is no such thing as a Mandalorian?
Like, for example, to be a
alien
samurai.
species, so to speak?
There was, but not anymore.
Oh, okay. Got it.
So to be a samurai, for example, it's conceivable that if you were a Korean back in the day and somehow was trained as a samurai, you could be a samurai.
So was Boba Fett technically a Mandalorian?
No. So Jango Fett, according to the story, and I could go into the details. The theory is that he somehow killed a Mandalorian and took the Mandalorian armor, or it was like a knockoff of Mandalorian armor, and then Boba Fett was a clone of Jango,
right?
And wore his father's armor, I think.
Wait, Boba Fett was his son, right? Oh, but he was a clone son.
He was a clone of him. Okay. Remember, because Jango Fett, So
he is a stormtrooper, but not a stormtrooper.
So all the stormtroopers
are Jango Fett clones.
Yeah. And Jango Fett was like, in return for including lots of money for cloning me, I also want my own clone as a son.
Which, by the way, the whole thing bothered me so much, and it still does, because that's not at all how the stormtroopers came off in episodes 4 and 5 and 6. They did not at all come like they're all the same.
So the story goes that, and I'm surprised you don't know these details, but it makes sense you wouldn't, because you don't have access to these kind of storylines. By the time we get to episode 4, they are just regular people. So eventually...
okay. So the ones we see in episodes 4, 5, and 6 are not all clones of...
Right. So episode 2 and 3, they're clones. We begin the Clone Wars, and they're the Republic's soldiers. Eventually, once the Empire gets into it, they're like, well, why do we need to pay for clones when we can just recruit people into the... And they're not as good, and they don't shoot as well, and they don't have discipline in the same way. But we're in charge. What does it matter?
Although that's not what... I wonder... Okay, in a retcon sort of way, that could be why Obi-Wan... Oh, no, that doesn't work still, because they were accurate. He's like, far too accurate for sand people. You know? Like, remember when the...
Yeah.
It's like... According to Obi-Wan, the stormtroopers are super accurate shooters.
Compared to sand people, but also like not as... Anyway, by the time we get to after episode 6, by the time we get to the Mandalorian times, basically the Mandalorian culture has been defeated and kind of spread throughout the galaxy, and the one way of looking at them is they're like Ronin. Yeah. Which is also getting back to the roots of, which we haven't mentioned yet, which I can't believe we haven't, is that it's not only a Western in space, but it's also a samurai movie in space, which all the Westerns were based off the samurai movies. Akira Kurosawa was copied by the Italian Westerns, which is copied by, and both were copied by the Star Wars Mandalorian show. Anyway, so think of the Mandalorians as like, people know about them and they think they're badass, but they also know that they don't have any power and they don't have any backing, and they're all just a bunch of roaming mercenaries who you don't have to really respect. And you realize that the Mandalorian is, he's living paycheck to paycheck. Yeah. He doesn't have a lot of resources.
He can afford carbonite.
Carbon's pretty cheap in this one.
Carbonite.
Yeah. So anyway, let's wrap this up, but let me just kind of rattle through my notes here. I like the fact that, for me, it rides the line between cool and cheesiness, because there's definitely elements of cheese, but I thought that they rode that line pretty well, because the line could have been too far too cool and not enough cheese, meaning not enough like funniness or not enough lightness.
Too serious.
Yeah, they could have made it real dour and real depressing.
And by the way, I do like that. Like, I like the interactions between him and the IG, what is it, 11?
11.
And, but although, can you explain to me?
And that's Taika Waititi, by the way, is the voice.
Is it?
Yeah.
Can you explain to me, right. Why? So on the one hand, I was like, oh, that's cool. That, of course, because since he's a robot, that whatever metal he's made of is like super strong, and so he's like deflecting a lot of those shots. But why does he get to like shoot him in the head once and he's
point blank in the head? I mean,
so
who
what,
knows?
they made the head less powerful than the
could be. I also think
that's the worst idea. And also, robots have to have their CPU in the head part of the body.
So you heard him say he gets shot and he's hurt and he's down, and he says they didn't get my central processing unit or whatever he says. I think IG-11 is going to come back because it's such a great character.
Sure.
And I bet you we're going to see him in a later episode, and he's going to be like, "You didn't get me in my central process.
I see.
You got me in a."
That would be good. I'd like that.
Yeah.
So I thought it was a little too sudden, but okay.
Yeah. Well, if you're watching and you don't like it, if you're watching it and you're like, "This is a 6."
No, because I was enjoying that fight so much.
I know.
But part of the thing that I thought was so cool was like, of course, he's a robot, so he doesn't need little fleshy parts that could get injured by the lasers. But then he's just like shot down. That's why I was like, oh, okay.
But for me, I loved that. There was nothing about, but I'm not saying it's empirically defensible. I'm just saying it's just interesting that like I'm watching it and I'm on board.
I would have
not so
preferred
on
him
board.
flipping a switch on the back to off.
Yeah, I guess so. I like that he doesn't talk too much, but I like that he does talk, because there were rumors that the Mandalorian wasn't going to talk at all, that we were never going to hear him talk. Like in the trades, they were saying, there's this new Star Wars about the Mandalorian, and he's never going to talk. And I thought, ooh, that's kind of cool. But then as I was watching this show, I was like, oh, he is going to talk a little bit. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, that's better, because if he never talks, that could get real hard to write a good storyline around a character that never talks.
That's why hire that specific actor.
Right. I liked that there's a lot of fan service done in a way that was not super cheesy. Like, in Solo, when he's like, well, I'm going to give you a name. How about Han?
No, like, what's your last name? Oh, well, you're all by yourself. Oh, well, Solo. Solo's a thing we say when people are by themselves.
Yeah.
Sounds cool.
Yeah. Like, there's a tone to those deliveries that are likable by me anyway. And that one wasn't so likable, but the ones in this TV show I thought were very likable. There's a lot of callbacks. For example, he doesn't like you. I don't like you either. They don't say that line, but they essentially do it. A lot of the races sort of come back from episode 4, the Greedo race and all that kind of stuff.
And that part doesn't bother me. Actually, it doesn't bother me, because that is a standard Star Wars thing. Like, you see the same races reoccurring.
Right. Like, we see a Twi'lek in episode 6 dancing around like a sex worker. Yeah. And then in episode 1, we see a Jedi Twi'lek. Yeah. I like a lot of the droids from the original trilogy, including the IG line. Baby Yoda, Life Day is referenced, if you noticed.
Yeah.
And
they referenced the Boba Fett riding the big dinosaur.
And his gun was from a Boba Fett cartoon, actually. The sounds of a ship not working, that chee 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 chee, is like when the Millennium Falcon wasn't working. The Ugnaughts, the Nick Nolte character from the Carbonite scene.
Yeah.
The land speeders, Carbonite, looking through a telescope and then something attacks you close up. The thermal detonator, which I was literally laughing out loud as the IG-11 kept going.
Okay,
initiating self-destruction. Stop it! I just thought it was just this.
That was funny.
Just delivered so well. And Taika Waititi, by the way, is going to direct future episodes of this, which is great. the Jawas and the Sandcrawler. I thought this here was pretty funny.
Like one of the things that I didn't like in the second episode was like, why didn't he just land closer? Oh, they'll see him coming. Like, dude, they rode up in the loudest, like, sklonkiest beast. And like it was just like it ate up so much time for him to get beat up by the one beast, then have to learn to ride the other beast, and like that whole sequence, I just thought was too westerny for my taste.
Yeah, very Western. Again, I liked it. I mean, I wasn't like this is the best scene, but I didn't notice its I don't know, clunkiness at all. But yeah, I could see that. If you're a dick, I could see that one. I like the fact that armor actually works in this Star Wars universe, because that's one of the things that's always bothered me is like the stormtroopers are wearing armor, but you've never seen the armor have any effect other than just weighing down the soldiers.
Right.
And in this world, the armor that he's wearing actually works.
Yeah.
I like that Baby Yoda's a puppet. I like the music. I like the fact that there's no Star Wars themes, actually, because it wouldn't really fit. And I like that they're spreading out the wings of this world. I like that we see the IG unit fighting, as we were talking about. And what I really love is the artwork at the end of each episode.
Oh, that's really good. Yeah.
Cool. What I didn't like, again, they fell from the top of the Sandcrawler and didn't break anything. And I also didn't like the fact that he killed the giant bull with a tiny knife.
I forgot about that. So was that knife supposed to be special or something?
No.
Because it's one thing to say, well, he hit a major artery, but even then, it's not like a 0 to 100 dead instantly. Like it's like, instead it's like this oncoming train is stopped dead in its tracks by the little pinch.
Yeah. Like I just thought, like when I saw that, I thought, wait, so we're gonna reveal he's gonna say, I got him, and they have a heart.
Something
like some line that explains why such a tiny little knife. And he didn't even seem to get him. Like the only explanation you get is if he got him in the eye socket and it goes straight into the brain.
Something, right?
But he didn't.
But it's
even
like on the side.
Right, it's like in the neck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, sure, maybe there's like this super geeky knowledge about that's where their brain is.
So theories. Baby Yoda is a clone of Yoda. That's one theory. Another theory is that Baby Yoda is just another one of the species. Another is, well, I guess those are the two.
And look, so I have to acknowledge that in full absolute episodes 4 through 6 canon, clearly some people, well, I believe some people are stronger with the Force. They might have just been telling Luke that, but at least they seem to indicate that, right?
Yeah.
So fine, so there's something to that. But I really never liked the whole genetic part of it, the whole midichlorian stuff. So it bothers me a little bit that just because you clone Luke, for example, all of a sudden the clone of Luke would be just as badass as Luke.
Well, we don't know that, one, and we don't know what Baby Yoda is.
Yeah.
And I believe the direction they're going in is that whether it's a clone of Yoda or it's just a different member of the species, of Yoda's species, it's well known in the cartoons anyway that Yoda's species is particularly strong with the Force. Yeah. So one of the reason why there's a theory that Baby Yoda is a clone of Yoda is that doctor with Werner Herzog that comes in
is a clone doctor,
has a symbol that is the Camino symbol.
Yeah.
And so, there's a lot of questions right now. It's just like the doctor wants it alive. Werner Herzog wants it dead. Does Werner, the former Empire officer, want the Baby Yoda dead for revenge, or because he wants the First Order, because that's the next phase?
Right.
Because the First Order actually began in underground pretty quickly after Jakku, which was like the official end of the Empire, which we never see anyway. We never see the Battle of Jakku. Maybe in the TV show. Anyway, so there's questions there. Hopefully they don't fuck that up. So just getting to the crew here again, we have Pedro Pascal, who is known as the Viper or as Prince Oberyn from Game of Thrones,
Yeah.
who got his head, pulled apart. He's also from Narcos as the other agent.
Yeah.
Cameos from Nick Nolte, Werner Herzog, Carl Weathers, Taika Waititi.
By the way, Werner Herzog adds this. In fact, what was so interesting when I was a little kid and I saw Star Wars is I wasn't very exposed to British accents, and hearing the British accents made it really feel like I was watching something else. It wasn't just like a normal thing. It was like, oh, this is from some other galaxy. And of course, I'm sure it wouldn't have been the same if you were in England. But anytime I hear Werner Herzog speak, I feel that way. I'm like, oh, this is something else and it's important.
Yeah, it's a very distinctive voice.
Yeah.
Have you heard the clip of him talking about how chickens have very small brains?
No.
Oh, just Google that. It's hilarious. The enormity of the smallness of the brain is unbearable. It's the last thing I want to talk about is the cinematographer, because the cinematography in this show is top notch, I believe. It's Greg Fraser, who also did Killing Them Softly, which is one of my favorite movies, which I believe you haven't seen.
No.
You got to see it. It's so good. It's a Brad Pitt, James Gandolfini.
Oh. Was that his last one?
It was maybe close to his last one.
Okay.
And directed by, I can't remember, but Killing Them Softly is a very, very good movie.
All right.
It's really good. This cinematographer also did Zero Dark 30, Foxcatcher, Rogue One, Lion, Vice, the upcoming Dune movie, the upcoming
Good resume.
Batman movie, and that's what. As soon as I saw he did Rogue One, I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense, because this looks tonally very much like Rogue One.
Yep.
Anyway.
Yeah, it's good.
So,
very good.
Final word on The Mandalorian, Berto.
Yeah, like I said, I am definitely enjoying it. I am not as enamored of it, of course, but maybe it'll go in even better places. I actually liked the second episode better than I did the first. I like the action sequence of the fight and the action sequence of the chase a lot, so hopefully there's more stuff like that. I do want to learn more about what's going on, because right now I'm not very invested on the plot. Like, I'm just invested in the action, and that's part of the thing that I think could make me like it better.
All right, well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle, in which we talked about nothing psychological. And please take care of yourself. May the Force be with you, because
you deserve it.